Okay. Hello, everybody. We are back with the Out of the Cave podcast. And yes, I say this every single week, but I am so excited to be here. And today is a special occasion for so many reasons. I'm extra excited to be here. My guest today, the man, the myth, the legend, Jon Gabriel. Thank you for being here. Pleasure to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Of course. So I told Jon before he even introduces himself, there are a couple things I have to say. The first thing I have to say is before getting on this call, I was just reflecting on the last decade of my life and the first time that we met. And the first time that we met, and I know we're going to get there later in this interview, the first time we met was at the Omega Institute. I was trying to remember, it's either 2016, it may have been 2015. And I was a participant at Jon Gabriel's retreat. And here's how it happened on my end. I had first seen Jon in the Hungry for Change documentary on Netflix, and I was very resistant to everything he had to say. I was not a fan of his message, which he knows at this point. And then after about a year and a half of yo-yo dieting and trying to lose weight and getting nowhere, I thought about the words that the bald man from the interview said all those years before. And I finally got back to listening to Jon Gabriel. And then I realized everything he was saying was true and resonated so deeply in a way that nothing else ever had. I started reading his books, became a big fan, signed up for the emails. And then I saw an email that Jon Gabriel was coming to New York. And I was like, stop everything. This man lives across the planet. You were in Australia at the time. And
Yeah.
I was like, I will do whatever needs to be done. I'm going to Omega and I am going to do this program. So I went to the 5-day retreat, and 3 days into the 5-day retreat, not even, okay, let me back up. The first day, Jon, you were standing outside the main hall, like welcoming everyone in, and I could not even speak to you. I was so starstruck. I literally could not speak. I could barely move. I couldn't believe I was seeing you in person. I was like, felt like you're like a rock star at a concert. So I think I avoided you for the first at least 48 to 72 hours. And then on day three, I wrote you a letter. And in the letter, it basically said, I don't know how, and I don't know when, and I don't know in what capacity. I need to work for you. I need to work with you. I need to help you. I need to support this mission and this message in whatever way that you might even consider having me. And that's where this all began. And so
So
now,
awesome. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and it's nearly 10 years later. I mean, and you have been such a tremendous support for us, for me and my community, the people at Omega and the people that I work with online, to have you as an inspiration and to have someone else that's lost so much weight and kept it off for so long is very rare, and
Yeah.
to be doing it and to have a similar message is so, so powerful, and it's been so helpful. So I'm eternally grateful for your help and your support and your inspiration and everything you do for us and for the world.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
deeply received. It's very exciting. So anyway, that's the energy I'm in right now of just
Yeah,
like,
cool.
whoa, that's where this all began. And now
Yeah.
you're here on my podcast. Whoa.
Good. Yeah.
So, okay, welcome to the show, Jon Gabriel. You're here. I will have you introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you? How do you like people to know you these days?
Yeah. Well, before I even do that, I just want to touch on something that you said about how you listened to me and you were so deeply resistant to my message, but then you became such a staunch supporter of it. That's happened to me a couple of times, and I just want to, and I feel like the people that are the most instantly resistant are the ones that really kind of get it the most when they get it, and those are the people that really think the hardest about these things and what's really important, what really matters, and when it clicks, it clicks. I remember when I first started, when I first wrote, and I'll get back to your who I am, whatever, in a second. But when I first wrote my book back in 2008, I started advertising my book online, the Gabriel Method, and it took off online. We were Google's largest weight loss advertiser in Australia in 2012 or 2009, and we had over 3 billion impressions. So we were kind of just like everywhere in an instant. But I remember, so I was getting asked to be in interviews all the time, and most of them were very supportive. I love your work. Da, 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 it's all touchy feely. It's all good. And then I get on this one, and it's a big one. I could tell it was big, or bigger than most, because there was like 4 or 5 people on the show, and they were from different places, and they had a tech guy say, "Okay, we're going live," and it was a big deal. I didn't know, I never knew who I was talking to. But I get on the show and we're talking, and then like about 10 or 10 minutes into it, I realized that this is a hit job. Like they said, let's get this guy on and destroy him. And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. And we started talking, and they became like they were big. They became my biggest supporters back then. And they were so big that if you hit up the Gabriel Method, they came up before me, and you'd hear the guy say I was skeptical at first, but da 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 da. And then it happened again when I wrote an article for Mind Body Green on the 7 things I did to lose 220 pounds without dieting. And that article was their second largest article. It had over 400,000 shares. So 400,000 people shared it, and tens of millions of people read it. And the comments they stopped taking comments in Mind Body Green on articles because of this article. People were so, oh, you're so full of shit. And there's one guy, and I was answering, I was in there, he was just so vicious. And he was like a big, fitness guy. And then he like became one of my biggest supporters. So it is those people that really think they're really passionate about this, that really take the time to understand what it is I'm trying to say, that when they get it, they really, really, okay, he's got something right. So who I am, my name's Jon Gabriel. I wrote a book about how I lost 220 pounds. I lost the 220 pounds back in 2004 without dieting, that is, without forced restriction. I was eating healthier, but I wasn't forcing myself. I wasn't counting calories. I wasn't denying myself anything. But I did lose 220 pounds. That was 20 years ago. I'm 60 now. I'm actually in the best shape of my life now. I had a little bit of struggle when I turned 55. It started getting a little bit harder. My hormones changed. I think the last Omega we were on, I was probably 30 or 40 pounds heavier, but things have changed now, and I'm now 20 years into this and in the best shape of my life. Um, and prior to losing the weight, I tried every diet under the sun, and I just kept gaining and gaining, including working face to face with the late Dr. Atkins. So I was real heavy in the 90s. I went from 200 pounds from 1990 to 2000. I went from 200 pounds to 400 pounds. And I tried dieting, dieting my way up, dieting. And
Oh yeah.
by losing 5 pounds on the diet, then gaining 10 pounds because I couldn't take it, losing 5 pounds. So I gained 200 pounds by losing 5 pounds, gaining 10 pounds, by trying every diet under the sun to lose weight. One of them was the Atkins, which is the most famous. I worked face to face with the late Dr. Atkins because he was living in New York at the time, and I spent thousands of dollars working with him. And the best he could do was just yell at me for being so fat. And I thought, wow, you're Dr. Atkins. You've spent millions of, you've sold millions and millions and millions of books, and you're world famous, and I've spent thousands with you, and you're just yelling at me. But but I recognize that every diet had a flaw in it, and that is that, yeah, you can force yourself to lose weight in the short term, but that doesn't mean your body's going to want to keep the weight off. And if you go to war with your body's going to win. The same way you try to force yourself to like sleep less, you could do that for a short period of time, but pretty soon you're going to need a big binge sleep. If you force yourself to breathe less for a short time, you can do that, but then you're going to need to breathe again. You force yourself to eat less or not, your body's going to fight back. So the only way to lose weight and keep it off, not the only way to lose weight, and we all know that, right? Because you and I now, we have 30 years between us of success, right?
Right.
So we're talking from experience. There's lots of ways to lose weight, but the only way to lose weight and keep it off is to get your body to want to be on lose weight. To get your body want to be thin, you've got to work with your body. So I did a lot of research into understanding the mechanics of why your body would want to be fat and want to be thin. And I had a solid biochemistry background from the University of Pennsylvania. I went to the Wharton School, studied business and economics, but I also wanted to be a doctor, so I studied biochemistry. And I also studied anthropology and human evolution. And that helped a lot in understanding survival adaptations, because what happens is fat is an adaptation for survival. your body would want to be fat if your body thinks it's in your best interest for survival reasons, and your body would want to be thin if it thinks it's in your best interest for survival reasons. So in a nutshell, and this is what I talk about in the book and all my teachings over the last 20 years, the way to lose weight and keep it off is to make your body think, and it's a trick, but you make your body think that you need to be thin in order to survive. If your body thinks that it's safer to be thin, it will be effortless. You will lose weight without dieting. And that doesn't mean you're not going to eat less, because you will eat less, but you're going to be less hungry. And that doesn't mean you're not going to eat healthy. Because you're going to crave healthier foods. In other words, you're not going to go to war with your body. It's not a diet by my definition, because a diet by my definition is you're forcing yourself. It's forced restriction. You're saying, oh, I want that pizza, but I'm not eating it. I want 3,000 calories, but I'm only having 1,500. That's forcing, and that does work in the short term, but not the long term. And ironically, the things that force you to lose weight are not the same things that get your body to want to be thin. In fact, most of the things that force your body to lose weight are things that get your body to want to be fat. And that's why you end up going to war with your body. So the whole paradigm shift is let's put all that aside for now, not throw it all out the window and eat McDonald's night and day and pig out. Let's not throw it all out the window, but let's understand from a survival adaptation what our programs are that we inherited from our ancestors and work with them instead of violating them. And when you diet through forced restriction time and time again, you're violating your body's survival programs. You're tricking your body into thinking you need to be fat. And then you go to war with your body, and that's why the diets don't work. So in a nutshell, my approach, the Gabriel Method, is to lose weight by getting your body to want to be thin, or to lose weight by getting your body to want to work with you, or working with your survival programs, understanding them, working with them. And that's different for everyone. It's not a one size fits all, as we can get into, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
That's all. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, the only natural follow-up question to that then would be, if I were listening to this, I'd be like, okay, break it down for me. Yeah. How exactly do we know what, I know you call them like the fat programs get, turned on and off. That's your language, right? So how do we know how to kind of turn off the things that make the body want to be fat? Right? And how do we turn on the things that would make the body want to be thin? How do you explain that?
It's the only question. It's the natural question, and that's what makes us. So let's look at the survival programs that we inherited. So when you look at fat, what fat is there to keep us alive under certain living conditions. So if we were living outdoors, which we no longer are, and we had to live through a famine, let's say we were living through a long winter where there wasn't enough to eat, those people that had extra fat going into the famine were the ones that were able to survive also in the winter. Like if you take a long cold winter where there's not a lot to eat and you're cold all the time, fat also insulates your organs. It keeps you warmer. So fat is integral for survival in times when it's chronically cold or there's chronically not enough to eat. That is long-term, kind of chronic, not 1 day, 2 day type of thing, but for weeks, months, not enough to eat, not enough to, you're cold. Fat will keep you alive. And in fact, the people that were able to gain weight easily in those living environments are the people that lived. And that means that they had kids. And those kids inherited the genes and the ability to gain weight easily. So for a lot of us, not for all of us, for a lot of us, but if you've lived in come from an Eastern European, for example, or cold climates, or several other different ones which we can talk about, we inherited the ability to gain weight very, very easily for survival reasons. Now, here's the thing about fat, though. It's not all good, because there are living environments where fat puts you at risk, different living environments than the ones I just outlined, not a famine or a long cold winter. But let's say you're living in a tropical paradise. You're living in a tropical island, and there's all the food in the world. So it's warm. Number one, it's warm. So you don't need fat for warmth, and maybe it's too warm, and less fat helps keep you cooler. So already it's better to have less fat in that living environment. And there's plenty of food. There's never a famine, because in a tropical island, you've got all the delicious tropical fruits. You've got fish, wild game, nuts, seeds. all you can eat, super healthy foods. So there's never a famine, never cold. So in those living environments, you don't need fat. Well, that's one thing to not need fat, but you can take it a step further, and that is in those living environments and other living environments. Not only do you not need fat, but in some living environments, such as these, and the one I'm about to outline, having even an ounce of extra fat could kill you, could put you in harm's risk. You could die in an instant. And that is that, let's take this same tropical paradise where you don't eat fat. Let's imagine there's tigers there, and and we live through these environments. So there's tigers and they run into the village. And if you're not one of the faster people, you don't have to be the fastest. You don't have to be as fast as a tiger. You just have to be one of the fastest, because they're going to weed out the slow ones in the gene pool, right? So if you're not one of the fastest people, you're dead. So in that living environment that I just outlined, not only is fat not helping you, fat is putting you in harm's way. So if you were living in that living environment, your body would say, we can't afford to have an ounce of extra fat. And if you look at many living environments, like in the African savannah, for example, or tropical islands, there are people there that eat all they want of natural foods, and they don't have an ounce of fat on them, and that's not an effort for them. They're not dieting, they're not counting calories. It's just that their body got the message that having an ounce of extra fat will put them at harm's risk. So that's the biology. That's the software that we inherited, that we came into this body, into this life with, which no longer serves us practically, because we don't live outdoors anymore, but we still have this biology, and it's still turned on by certain stresses. So if you look at what the different stresses, being in a famine is a type of stress. Being in cold for months and months is a type of stress. Running away from tiger is a type of stress, but they're different types of stresses. And we hear about different types of stresses when doctors talk about what's a good stress and a bad stress. We hear about chronic low-grade stress, and we hear about acute stress. And this is how it ties it all together. A chronic low-grade stress is something that you're not going to die from that day or that hour or that minute, but it's a stress that you could die from in months and months and months. An acute stress is something you could die from in that minute. If you are being chased by a tiger and you don't run away, you will die in 30 seconds. That's called an acute life or death stress. So our biology has inherent in it, is programmed to interpret chronic low-grade stresses as a living situation that favors having more fat, and acute stresses as a living situation that favors being super thin. That's our biology. But the thing is, stress is kind of arbitrary in the sense that you and I might be working at an office together, right? And because when I talk about stress, there's lots of different things, right? Stress is being outdoors. Stress is being chased by a tiger. Stress is worrying about the stock market. Stress is worrying about how to make ends meet, or how to pay your kids' tuition. Stress is feeling the trauma of having been sexually abused, and like being in a dark alley and someone walking by you. Stress is not getting enough sleep. Stress is processed food. Stress is toxins. There's a lot of different types of stresses. So they all go into this kind of blanket thing of how does it affect your biochemistry? And the answer is, it depends on the person. It depends on what their predisposition is and the way they're interpreting the stress. So if you take an example of, let's say, and I lived through this, as a matter of fact, a real life example of, I worked on Wall Street for 10 years. And that 10 years that I worked on Wall Street, I gained 200 pounds. And I was under a lot of stress. And I had my own business. I was a chairman of a Wall Street brokerage company that I started with a business partner who was the same age as me, same height, looked like me, sounded like me, could have been my brother. We were the same weight when we started. We were both 200 pounds, 6 foot. I was 6'2", so he was 6'4". When 10 years later, when we ended our working relationship, I was 400 pounds. He was the same 200 pounds, or he was maybe 170 by then. He was getting thinner and thinner, and I was getting fatter and fatter, and we were living through the same life. But the difference is the way our bodies interpreted the stresses, because when things went wrong in the business, for example, I would just sort of like take it, I didn't react. And so I was the way you would be if you were in a famine. You're not going to like start pounding a tree if you're in a famine, right? You're just going to have to take it. You're going to slow down. So I slowed down. I took it. That's how I interpret it. Him. Anything that went wrong, the fax machine wouldn't work. He'd flail. He'd throw it. He'd fuck. He'd swear. Everything was like a tiger to him. So he was like, we were in the same office, but to his body, he was living in the African savannah being chased by tigers 24/7. And I was in an Arctic wasteland starving to death, even though I was eating nonstop. Like that was, so when you talk about stress, because this is our programming, but we're not living outdoors anymore, right? And we're not, so we have to understand our programming and we have to work with it. And my process is then just take a person, whoever you are, where are you now? What are the stresses that are causing your body to hold on to weight? How do we address those stresses? They might be mental or emotional. They might be physical. There's a lot of different things that go into it. And it's not a one size fits all, but the concept is one size fits all. That is, you've got something going on in your body that's forcing you to hold on to weight, that's tricking you into thinking you need to have extra weight. We need to address that issue. And that's what we do. And that's what the first book I wrote, The Gabriel Method, just outlined all those things and all the coaching. We have a 12-week program. We have a 12-month coaching program. They're all geared toward being at more and more levels of of customization to get to what it is that's causing the problem for you.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, anyone who's listening to this, right? When I first heard you, Jon, talking about this in a documentary, I
yeah,
had just lost 150 pounds through diet and exercise,
yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
full on willpower, which is
Which you
why
can
when
do.
I,
There's no
right,
question you can do it.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So at the time when I heard someone suggest that diets don't work, it
yeah,
was like, of course they work. I just lost 150
yeah,
pounds.
yeah,
Like, what do you mean?
yeah,
I'm the proof they work, you know? And then I'm going to share this visual with everyone. I've probably said it here before, but it's your original that I just love because it's so relatable. And I feel like everyone knows this feeling. It's like holding a volleyball underwater. That's
yeah,
like, right?
yeah,
That's what it always goes back to. It's like you can hold a volleyball underwater. The question is not, can you get the weight off your body? We all know that we can do that.
yeah,
The
yeah,
question is, then what? Right. And then
yeah,
you lift your hand up off the volleyball and poof, there's all the
yeah,
weight. It just like
yeah,
pops right up. So
yeah,
I experienced that for about another year and a half before going back to let me explore this guy, Jon, and what's in his book. And then that's when I read your book. And that's what, like, no exaggeration, changed the trajectory of my life because
yeah,
that was the beginning of understanding there was a connection between mind and body. And in a lot of ways, that's really what it comes down to. That's what you're saying is like, no matter how, it's not so much about what's happening in the office on Wall Street. It's
yeah,
about the way your brain is interpreting that and the way your body's responding to that. That's going to have everything to do with it. And that's why when people question, why do I struggle with food? Why am I 400 pounds and the guy in the office next to me is not? It's
yeah,
because your system is interpreting your reality in a different way, not because your reality is actually different. And that's where it becomes a question of having to look inside. And, that's what all the coaching and all the work is like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
is it for you? What's actually going on here?
Yeah. At the end of the day, what's the chemistry? Like
Yeah.
what kind of type of chemistry is your body creating from the stresses in your life? And again, we're targeting at the moment, and we're going to talk about all different stress. We're targeting mental stress, but what is the chemistry? At the end of the day, what is the chemistry that is being produced from the thoughts? Because when you have a thought, you have chemistry. You think, oh, I love someone, you get flooded with all kinds of love chemicals. You think I hate someone, you get flooded with all kinds of stress chemicals. You think, oh shit, how am I going to pay rent tomorrow? You're going to get flooded with a whole other bunch of stuff. So those chemicals play a part in your in your biology, and at the end of the day, what happens is it's the chronic. If you really want to sum it down, it's what I call it's chronic low grade stress and chronic low grade inflammation that tricks your body into wanting to be fat and causes the chemistry that forces you to gain weight. Chronic low-grade stress and chronic low-grade inflammation cause insulin resistance and leptin resistance. Insulin resistance and leptin resistance combined literally force you to gain weight. They make you hungrier. Your brain stops listening to your stomach when you're full. you lose the ability to burn fat. You become very efficient at storing fat. Your metabolism slows down. You crave sweets more. You crave food more. You combine it all, and that comes from leptin resistance and insulin resistance. That comes from chronic low grade stress and chronic low grade inflammation. The thing, I break out chronic low-grade stress and chronic low-grade inflammation because they're broken out in conversation. But in reality, chronic low-grade inflammation, which is largely misunderstood, is just chronic low-grade stress. It just means a chronic elevation of a different type of stress hormones. What are called the pro-inflammatory cytokines, but those are stress hormones. So it's chronic low-grade stress of one form or another that causes insulin resistance and leptin resistance, and that combination puts your body into fat storage, and it's humbling. You can't imagine what. And if there's one thing that really frustrates me is to see people that have had success. To me, weight loss is like an elephant in a room. There's that story where you put like 10 blind men in a room with an elephant, and they all are all over the elephant. One feels the trunk, and what is it? It's a snake. Another one feels the leg. It's a tree. Another one feels the ear. It's a fan. You know what I mean? Everybody has their version, but it's an elephant. No pun intended. It's an elephant. Okay. There's too many components to it. But you get this one guy who's had a lot of success, right? Because he lifted weights, and that's all he had to do was flip tires. And so for him, that means that's all anybody has to do. Right? He's never been sexually abused. He doesn't have a predisposition toward weight. He didn't go to fat camp like I did at the age of 10. He didn't have locks on his refrigerators like I did. He didn't have food taken out of his mouth. He wasn't he flipped some tires. Good for him. But he's so sanctimonious and and so sure that that's all, and just shut up and flip some tires. It's not the reality for some people, and it's really humbling. And for me, as a weight loss guru, whatever, after I did lose the weight and I kept it off for 15 years, I struggled. When I turned 55, my hormones changed again. But it's the hormonal changes that then caused the leptin and insulin resistance. It's a stress. When you go through what's a male version of menopause, just like females do, it causes stress. It's a chronic low-grade stress that causes. So even for me, knowing everything I did, I still couldn't get back to the weight I wanted to for several years. And that was incredibly humbling for me, and that you have to really live through it to respect the fact that it's just not that simple, that you've got to respect the chemistry and you've got to understand it and you got to work with it. And but the flip side of that is that once you do, and you really get the chemistry right, and you're like, hold on a second, every day I'm losing a little bit of weight, and I'm not I forgot to eat dinner, and whatever it is. When you live through that experience of being in a body that wants to lose the weight, it's so miraculous. And that's why I wrote the book in the first place, is because when I went from 400 pounds to being in a body that wanted to be thin and every day losing the weight, I said, I have a message for the world, because I tried the traditional way. I tried every diet and it didn't work. And now I'm losing weight without trying, but just the reason why what was different was, just so you know, I mean, for me personally, I was working on Wall Street. I left my business. I moved to Western Australia. I started growing my own food and living very simply. And the lack of stress meant the lack of stress hormones, and the weight melted off my body. And I started gaining the weight when I moved to Wall Street. So for me, it was a stress thing. It's not a stress thing for everyone. I know that. But for me, it was. And when the stress went away, the weight melted off. And I was still eating McDonald's and pizza, at least in the beginning. Once I had lost about 120 pounds, I thought, you know what? I can get back into shape. And I started really making an effort and working out and trying harder. But I lost a good 120 pounds eating. I lived in the middle of nowhere in Western Australia. Okay. The closest McDonald's was 60 miles away. I once drove to McDonald's and back for lunch. Okay. I was eating pizza, but I was losing weight, and I was just not that hungry. I'd eat the McDonald's, but it wasn't about eating anymore. I'd have a couple of bites. So I lost the weight in the beginning. I lost the weight without trying, and it's because the stress went in. And when you live through that, it's a truly miraculous, and to work with people and have this experience where they get to that place where their body wants to be thin. Maybe it took some work to get there, not work of counting calories, but work of addressing the stresses and the issues. When you get to that place, it's truly miraculous. And what I always say is that, when you try to lose weight by dieting time and time again, you start to think it's impossible. The same way that if you were trying to walk through a sliding glass door and you didn't know there was a door there, right? You just thought it was an opening and you just kept hitting your head. You'd be like, I don't know, it's just impossible to walk through this opening for whatever reason. It cannot happen. But when you open the door, it's the easiest thing in the world, right? So to me, getting your body to want to be thin by addressing the issues that are causing the problem is opening the door, and it becomes the easiest thing in the world. And that's why I say there's nothing easier and more natural than losing weight when your body wants to be thin. You have to get your body to want to be thin first.
Amen. And I have exactly the same experience, which is why I get so excited to talk about. I remember at a certain point, I was so terrified. And I'm curious to ask, I want to ask you some personal questions about how you
Yeah,
figured some of this stuff out. Because
yeah,
I remember at the time, I heard what you were saying, and I was like, okay, in my bones, this makes sense to me. Like, there's something really, really resonating on a soul level.
yeah,
But I was so scared of giving up dieting. Like I had
yeah,
so much fear of
yeah,
what would happen and how out of control I would be and how much
yeah,
weight I would gain if I weren't counting calories and I didn't know every single calorie that I burned
yeah,
and so what did end up being miraculous to me, like nothing short of a straight up miracle, was that I just took what at the time it felt like a total leap of faith, just blind faith,
yeah,
and I just said, okay, I'm not getting on the scale anymore. I'm going to focus on my health over my weight. I'm going to
yeah,
focus on stress reduction over size reduction. This is everything I teach in my program. It was like all it was a chart I built out with, literally wrote it on paper and hung it out. And I just decided I was going to basically practice abstinence from dieting.
yeah,
And that's what I needed to do. And I was just focusing on things that I really learned from you, primarily things like meditation and visualization and breathing and journaling and just getting into
healing. Yeah,
stress reduction and healing for the
yeah,
first time in my life. This was not, I was the guy flipping tires, telling everyone they had to flip
yeah,
tires
yeah,
until this point, right? So then it was miraculous because naturally, it was the first time ever naturally my weight stopped going up
yeah,
and then started going down
yeah,
because
amazing.
I just stopped trying
It's
to
like the
control
volleyball
it.
turned to stone.
Exactly, exactly. But I say that because sometimes people say, I can't give up dieting. I'm so
Yeah,
scared. And that
right.
has a lot to do with control and
Yeah,
the kind of inner psychological stuff. But I'm curious, when you were figuring a lot of
yeah,
this out, you
I get
know,
it.
how did that go for you?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that what you're saying is you did take a tremendous leap of faith, and in fact, well, in many ways, it was a bigger leap of faith than I took, and I'll tell you why. Because when I was 400 pounds, I understood at a certain point that for whatever reason my body wanted to be fat, and as long as it wanted to be fat, there's nothing I could do to stop it. And it did help to have both my biochemistry and my anthropology, human evolution training, because you learn about stress and how your body adapts to stress. And I knew that something was going on. I didn't know what, but I got to a place where I was over 400 pounds, and this was a turning point for me. I decided that I was never going to diet again because it just wasn't working. I kept gaining, and I just said, I just don't want to gain any more weight. I resigned myself to the fact, Lisa, that I was going to live the rest of my life at 400 pounds. And that was the last time I was ever 400 pounds, was possibly that day or that week, ironically. But I resigned myself to the fact that I was never going to, that I was possibly going to live the rest of my life over 400 pounds. I just didn't want to gain any more weight because already, it was so hard to get by, and if you get to the next level, then you can't even take care of yourself. So like, I just was like, all right, I give up. And before this, I was in this place where I was always so disgusted with myself. When I went from like 200 to 220, I'd be like, oh, you're so fat. I can't believe you're 220, And then all of a sudden I'd be 250 and I just want to get back to 220. And I'd be like, it's so fat at two. And then I'd be 280. I just want to get back. And I'd be 300. And I'd be just, like, and so I wasn't disgusted anymore. I was just like, all right, okay, if this sucks, I give up, like, okay, I'm a 400-pound man now. And what was frustrating for me was like in college, I was a triathlete. I was, I had stomach muscles and I was lifting weights, and this was the 80s before everybody did that. I was like in good shape. And so it was really frustrating and humbling for me, but I was like, okay, I give up. I just don't want to gain any more weight. I'm done with this whole issue. I want to be careful. I don't want to gain any more weight. That was the first place. So it's almost like I didn't have to give up. You had like a leap of faith because you had lost the weight and you had something to lose. I just was like, okay, it's not going to happen, So that was the first thing that happened with me, was that. And then after that happened, it was almost like a perfect storm of positive things happened. Number one, the first thing that happens, my mom had been after me forever to get my sleep apnea checked. And I didn't even know what sleep apnea was or why it would be so bad for you. And I didn't listen to her all those times. But for whatever reason, I think I was just in a more humble, receptive, looking for answers type of place. And I got my sleep apnea. Turned out I had one of the worst sleep apneas that the sleep technicians had ever seen. But that was due to my weight. That went away when the sleep. So I had to see. But when you do have sleep apnea, we're talking about stresses, that takes it, that 10x is the problem,
Right.
because then you're not sleeping, so you're tired all the time. Your cortisol levels are going up, which causes insulin resistance and junk food cravings and weight gain in lots of other ways. And you just like you. So I got a CPAP machine, and I I left my business and moved to Australia all within like a couple of weeks. So now I'm just living very simply. So I had a little bit of money. It wasn't like I had $20 million or something. I had enough money to buy a house, a very inexpensive house, all cash, live on land and have very low expenses. So I wasn't working. I didn't have big expenses. I didn't have a mortgage or anything. I had a couple $100s of expenses a week, whatever. I had the CPAP machine, and I was doing a lot of meditating and a lot of praying and a lot of asking for guidance. And the weight, it was just like the weight was just melting off of me. So all those things kind of like, I had to come to this place of surrender. I had to let go. I had to listen. I had to look for help. And I had to address, without knowing it, I addressed the two biggest things that were causing the problem, which was my sleep apnea and the stress of my life. I I didn't even know I was addressing it. So yeah, that worked out really well for me. And not everyone can do that. I mean, everyone can get their sleep apnea taken care of, maybe, but not everyone can switch their job or whatever. And I understand that, but it's not always the case for everyone. That's not always the problem for everyone. That just was my thing. But the thing is, the thing was addressed to the extent that a year into my life at that point, I'm 120 pounds lighter without making any effort, eating French fries, eating pizza. I had chocolate almonds in the fridge. And what I decided was I was never going to have a good day or a bad day again, because the way my life was defined by good days and bad days, almost the way like an alcoholic or like, you know what I mean? It was defined by that.
Yes.
So it wasn't anymore. Like, so a good day was defined by, you never did anything wrong. A bad day was defined by the second you did something wrong, you're like, fuck it, it's a bad day, and you'd have
Right.
like I remember in New York, being in New York one time, and I was having a bad day, and I had 3 delivery people show up at my door at the same time, and I'm like 380 pounds, and they're all waiting in line for just. And like I tried to make it out like there was a party going on, not
Right. Right.
hold on everybody, like but it's all. So that was my life was defined by good days and bad days, and I decided I would never have a good day again and never have a bad day again. And so I had these chocolate almonds, and the minute I wanted one, I would eat one without any hesitation at all. But I was doing a lot of, like, at the time I was doing hypnosis for weight loss, which is to me very similar to visualization for weight loss. And the visualizations that I created, in the sense that you're programming your mind, you're reducing stress. I was adding salads, adding protein shakes, adding things that had omega-3s, all the things I talk about. I was adding those things, but I was not dieting, and I was having whatever I wanted, and I'm 120 pounds lighter a year later. And that's when I said, okay, wow, I got a message for the world, because,
Yeah.
I'm not trying, like, wait a
Right.
second, what's going
Right.
on here? So that's when, like, and then at the very end, I did this huge detox, and that's a whole other story, which we can talk about if we have time. In the last 3 weeks, I did this huge detox that got rid of not what I realized in retrospect is not only did it get rid of the last bit of weight I had, the last 20, it got rid of all my loose skin, which a detox does. And I didn't know that. It's my brother, my brother, he's a dentist, Joe, and like he's always, I call him the Gabriel Method whisperer because he's very smart and he does his research. And he said, when you do a detox, your body goes into this state uh, where it just eats anything. It'll eat cancer if you have cancer. It'll eat loose skin. It just eats whatever. And that's why, like, if you look at the pictures of like after I lost the weight, I didn't have any loose skin. It was because of this detox I did at the end. And I do a lot of detoxing now. And I love detoxing. And I still don't, in a weird way, I still don't consider that dieting because I don't get hungry when I detox. If you do it right, if you know how to get into the detox place, your body just shuts down for a period of time. So I don't do it as a way to, to lower my calories or to lose 10 pounds for a wedding. I don't do it like that, but I do it to detox, literally get rid of toxins and re-energize my body. And it does this incredible thing with the loose skin. So at the end, I didn't even have any loose skin, which was but what was interesting also was when we talk about visualization, I'd always done visualization all my life for things. I started visualizing also when I was 400 pounds and I gave it back. I started visualizing that I had lost all my weight and I had stomach muscles again, the way I did when I was in college. Big muscles, stomach, thin waist. I ended up like that at the end without any loose skin, like exactly the way I visualized it. And that was, I thought that was that, and that's one of the reasons why I incorporate visualization into everything, because I like, okay, there's something really powerful here too, when you know how to really leverage your mind. So, we incorporate that also, but that was my kind of leap of faith. But I think your leap of faith was bigger, quite frankly, and I
Yeah.
respect you for it and I applaud you for it. But that's how I ended up in that situation, this in
Yeah.
a similar situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I so hear that. And I hear you. I appreciate being seen in that. I remember the way that I thought about it at the time was that, like you said, I felt like I had kind of this come to Jesus moment with myself that I have two paths in front of me. One path is that I keep getting on a diet and I keep gaining weight. Like at that point, I remember saying to myself, every time I think diet, I immediately think weight gain. I erased the diet equals weight loss from my mind and
Yeah.
I just replaced it with diet equals weight
Me
gain.
too. Me too. I got to
It's
say,
like,
that's 100%. That's what it means to me, and that's what it
right,
means to the body too, because
right,
it means you're in a famine, and a famine means to the body means, oh, we're in a famine, gain weight. You're not going to gain weight in the famine, but as soon as there's food available, you will gain weight.
right.
Because that's what the body it's saying to the body. So you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that's one path. I can keep doing what I'm doing and keep gaining weight because I was like you, I was lose 10, gain 15, lose 15, gain 20. And then I thought, well, I really don't want to keep doing that. What is the alternative? And the alternative was big fat question mark. That was I'm not really sure. I'm trusting and believing. And there was a part of me that said there's a lot of science behind this. There is science. If there weren't science, I would not be on board at the time. But that's what it was. And so I just said, fuck it. Like literally, what do I have to lose? Because this is the only alternative that there is. And it was ultimately my own, version of embodying the Gabriel method and following that. And
Yeah, well, there's real science. There's
yeah,
science even just in terms of logic. There's real logic.
right,
Like, for example, when I first wrote the book, The Gabriel, I started writing in 2004, finished in 2006. I was talking about how I was able to get into better shape by just sprinting for a couple of seconds, a couple of times a week, as opposed to running a marathon. And back then, that was radical because running a marathon, you're going to like burn calories, right?
right,
But the reason I did it was out of logic. Now, there's a lot of science to back it now that high intensity interval training is better for burning fat, but I did it based on logic. And the logic was that if you're out walking in the woods and a bear comes out of nowhere and starts chasing you, you're not going to go on a 40-minute cardio walk, right?
right,
You are going to sprint 10 seconds, life or death. And that's going to communicate to your body that, hey, we live in a place where there's bears that can kill us. So we need to be able to move faster than the bear or really, really fast, really quick. And so from a logic standpoint, I started practicing that, and that started working really good. Now, fast forward years later, that's the norm. That's the standard.
Right.
There's not a credible person in the world that would say that, doing that slow marathon grind out thing is better for weight loss. You might burn more calories, it's not better for weight loss. It's been shown time and time and time again. But this is the reason.
Yeah.
From a logic standpoint, you've got to give your body a reason to want to be thin. You got to make your body want to be thin. If you're not doing that, you're not going to lose the weight easy, and you're not going to keep the weight off.
Right.
You've got to give your body a reason to be thin.
Yeah.
And forcing your body not to eat is not giving your body a reason to be thin. I'm
Right.
sorry. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
Well said. Well, that's another thing that I just remember hearing from you so many times, especially at Omega, where you're teaching things and then, you follow it up by saying medicine and science is either going to catch up to this like in a couple years or in a couple decades or whenever. But how long do you want to wait? Like, how long do
Yeah,
you want to hang out waiting for, your
it makes
doctor to
sense.
tell you what we already know? And that's just, it always got me because that is absolutely true.
And I'm
So,
sorry, your doctor
yeah.
who's, people always get upset when I say things like this, but your doctor who gets $1 million a year from pharmaceutical companies to sell you pills, like, okay, he does,
Right.
he does do that. All right.
You
That's
can
all.
say
You
that
can
here.
you can make any reference you want,
Right.
but ask him how much he gets from pharmaceutical companies to sell pharmaceutical products. Just ask him. It's a fair question.
Yes.
He doesn't have to disclose it to you,
Right.
which is a problem right there, if you ask me. But it's a fair question. You can make money. You can say I'm insinuating all kinds of nefarious things if you want, but just ask the question.
I
I don't
hear
get
you
any money
there.
from
I know.
pharmaceuticals. I can.
I appreciate that. And I always think it's very important to have that as part of the
Yeah.
conversation. Now, I think another thing that you're mentioning, but I want to kind of, I mean, maybe we ended here. I'm not really sure. We'll see how it goes. But I think something you're saying that is really important, and I want everyone listening to this to think about this. What you're talking about in so many ways is safety.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you know that, and I know that. And
Yeah.
to me, at this point, I understand the baseline for everything, especially long-term sustainable weight loss, is safety. So when we talk about, people listen to this podcast, they've heard 100 episodes, something of me talking about why safety is important. And in your language, it's the way that we get the body to want to be thin. It's the way that we work with the body rather than against the body, is it has to feel safe. It has to feel safe mentally and emotionally, spiritually, socially, physically, physiologically. Safety is baseline, is the number one priority.
Yeah. Well, so here's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Along those same lines, is that the whole purpose of fat is for physical safety, for physical survival. There's no other purpose. And when I'm talking about fat, I'm talking about storing excess fat. I'm not talking about fat in general. Fat has a function in biochemistry, but I mean, the whole purpose of storing excess fat is to have it for physical safety. There's no other reason. So if your body thinks that it's in your interest to have excess fat for physical safety, you're going to have that excess fat. If your body thinks, based on your body's logic and wisdom and the signals it's getting, the chemical signals it's getting, your body thinks that being uh, as thin as possible is safer, then you will be as thin as possible. It's about safety to the body. And so you have to convince your body that being thin and fit is safer than being fat. And that's by understanding your body's logic, you're understanding your body's programming, your body's survival wisdom, and working with it. And it comes down to chemical signals. What is the chemical signal of eating a donut versus a salad? What's the chemical signal of worrying about, of meditating versus not meditating, or worrying about the stock market versus not worrying about it, falling in love versus not falling in love, being in nature versus not. It all comes down to chemical signals, but your body has to interpret all these chemical signals, right? So what's the chemical signals of getting a good night's sleep versus not? That's what it comes down to. What's the chemical signals of sprinting for 5 seconds and imagining a tiger's chasing you versus walking for 2 hours? What are the chemical signals that your body's getting? Those chemical signals your body's going to try to make sense of and say, okay, based on all these chemical signals that I'm getting, it's safer to be fat or it's safer to be thin. Now, for most of us, the chemical signal says it's safer to be fat. If you go on a diet, your body's going to say it's safer to be fat. It's just that simple because you're artificially creating a famine. If you eat a lot of processed foods, your body's going to say it's safer to be fat because you're nutritionally starved, because you're getting inflammation in your gut that's causing leaky gut, that's causing chronic low-grade inflammation, that's causing the signals, the same signals as a famine because it's the chronic low-grade inflammation signals. If you're not getting a good enough sleep because you have sleep apnea, because you gain the weight, if you were sexually abused, I had the first time I really understood this, and for me, there was a time when being heavier felt safer for me, and I grew up in a violent, I had a violent upbringing, and so being bigger. That's one of the reasons why I lifted so much weight when I was a kid. But being bigger was safer. But I really, the first time I really resonated, like hit home, was after I lost my weight in 2004. I was in Australia and I was on a show. I sent my before and after pictures to a show, and they called me within a half an hour and they said, we're going to be there, you know, in an hour. And I said, I live in Denmark, Western Australia. I'm, 500 miles from the closest town. They said, we have a helicopter. And they took a helicopter and they interviewed me. And I was on national television for this show called Today Tonight. And this lady called me and I worked with her. And so this was her story. So when she was 10 years old, she had a babysitter, a female babysitter, that was sexually abusing her from age 10 to 13. And the whole time she was being abused, she was gaining weight. Eventually, she gained so much weight that the babysitter lost interest. The babysitter literally said, oh my God, you're so fat, you're gross. So this is a person now, she was now in her late 30s. There's nothing she could do to lose weight and keep it off. Because what would happen is, as soon as she started losing weight and someone said, wow, you look great. Or a guy, what if a guy looked at her or someone, wow, you look great. She froze, she freaked out. And she would say to me, oh, I sabotaged myself. You're not sabotaging yourself. That's safety. Your body created an indelible interpretation that weight equals safety. And if you look at how natural adaptation of animals, being an elephant or a whale is safe. You don't have to be faster than a tiger if you're an elephant, because you're big. So you have to be fast if you're a mouse, So like if you look at how animals adapted in the wild, our biology follows a similar logic to it. What's going to feel safe to you? For some people, being thin feels safer because they really feel like they want and need a mate and they need to attract a mate and they feel safe with that and they want the attention. But for others, they don't because they've had some trauma. So that is another type of signal that the body's getting. And in my experience, people that have the biggest weight, the biggest lifetime weight issues, where no matter what they do, they keep coming back to a very large weight. They can trace it back to that, and that has to be addressed because when you start losing the weight and you get attention, you need to feel safe with that. There was another lady I remember speaking to very recently where she's in the store with her sister. Her sister's 40 pounds lighter. This guy walks in, an attractive guy. She looks at the guy and she thinks to herself, oh, I'm safe. He's not going to look at me. He's going to look at my sister. I'm safe. I said, you're safe. You're safe. Okay. So I said, as long as you feel that's you don't feel safe if someone's looking at you, we don't have to talk about how many calories you're eating,
Yep. Yep.
or whether or not you should go keto. Like we don't need to have that conversation because you don't feel safe. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling that, but you need to recognize that and you need to work on that because there's millions of people that do feel safe being thin or attractive or seen. And there's nothing wrong with it one way or the other. But if you have that, it's going to cause your body to feel safer having weight. So that's what safety is. So to the body weight is safety in one form or another, some form of safety. And you've got to understand it in your own biology and you've got to address it in your own biology so that your body feels safe. At the end of the day, you will lose weight. You will lose the weight and keep it off the way you have kept it off for 10 years. And now I'm on 20 years. If your body feels safer having less weight, that's the beginning and the end of it.
That's it. That is it. And that is exactly what I mean when I say like safety is baseline. Safety is the number one priority
That
because
is
we're
it.
so distracted with calories and all the bullshit. But it's like exactly that. And now at this point, years later, I've heard so many of these stories
Yeah.
where that's really what it boils down to. And that's an invitation and a question for anyone and everyone who's listening to this to just get really curious, examining your relationship with safety through the lens of the size of your body, because that will give you way more information that will support you in a long-term, sustainable, healthy weight loss than how many calories you're eating every day or what macronutrients are going into your body. Like that's the conversation here.
If you just like, if you visualize yourself being your most thinnest, most ideal, and feel into that and feel how that feels. And if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't feel safe, ask yourself, ask your higher self, ask your consciousness, ask your ask God, ask whatever your relationship is to the universe. What do I need? What do I need to do to be to be that in that situation and feel safe and feel safer in that situation than I do now, and guide me to that, and you will be guided to a thinner, fitter body. That's really
Mm.
what that's the beginning of it. That's like setting the autopilot,
Yeah.
plan. You're setting it to that place,
I'm
and
so
then you'll be
glad you
guided
said
to
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because okay, this will be the perfect place to end this interview then, because this is another memory I always think of. The first summer at Omega, when we met, I felt at that time, context for everyone listening to this, I felt at that time the way I would describe it is I didn't have a spiritual bone in my body. Like I was so left brain. I want the science, I want the data. I was
Yeah.
not, everything at Omega was like way too woo-woo for me. And but I had an open mind and I was here for it. But I say that because I think it was the last day of the retreat, or maybe the fourth out of 5 days of the retreat. And you were guiding a meditation, and I still did not like meditating, and I was crawling in my skin every day, but I stuck it out. And one of the meditations you were guiding it, and it was longer than usual, but you had us connect to higher power,
Yeah.
higher self, Buddha, God, whatever it is for you, right? And at the time, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck is going on here, but I'm just going to go with it. And I thought, I'm going to call upon my higher self. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'll throw it out there. And it was amazing to me what happened. This was the first time ever, the way I describe it, it was the first time ever I felt like I got information that
Yeah.
came from my heart to my head rather
Yeah.
than from my head to the
Yeah.
rest of my body.
I'm
And
getting
there was
chills.
there
I'm
was
getting
an
chills. Very
awareness
powerful. Yeah.
that came through for the first time ever. And you had us say to higher self, will you guide me and will you protect me and will
Yeah.
you support me? And the information that I received was very clearly, I have always been here.
Yeah.
I have always been guiding you. I have always been protecting you.
Yeah.
It was the first time it landed in my body that I was over 300 pounds from a place of, I am protecting you. I am keeping you safe. Like I've been working with you this whole time.
Yeah.
And I would like literally my life was never the same. I had never, ever had an awakening like that, a spiritual experience like that.
Wow.
And that was the beginning. That was really the beginning of me just taking it home and embodying it because I felt like I was so on my own team. And that's what that's what all of this is really about is anyway. So,
So powerful.
yeah.
I get chills when you say that because, for me personally, as part of, I meditate every day and have for many, many, many years. And I always start every day with asking for my God, my higher self to work through me and guidance. And I get, tremendous benefit from that and tremendous information. And I just feel like it's a partnership. And I've come to learn that you got to ask, it's almost like you got like a parent that's following you that could help you. Like let's say you're a little baby and you're trying to figure out some blocks, and your parents there, you could help you, but you got, and then they say, dad or mom, can you help me? Sure, I can help you, but you got to
Right.
ask, so
Right.
like that's the impression I get from my relationship
Mm-hmm.
with my higher, whatever, however you want to define higher self, whatever that means, who knows?
Right.
But this higher place of wisdom and knowledge and perspective, it's there. You have to ask. You have to ask for the guidance. You have to ask for the wisdom and the support. And if you do that, if you visualize the way you would like to look, and you say, "Can you please help me get to this place in a way that I feel safe and protected? Can you help me do that?" You get, miracles. It's
Yeah.
miraculous what can happen if you do that way. That's when you're working from the highest perspective, from your higher parts of your brain
Yep.
to your higher self. You're working from the top down at that
Yep.
point to
100%.
affect your biology. Yeah,
Yeah. Very
awesome.
cool.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for
yeah,
being here.
yeah. My pleasure.
Any last words, any final nuggets, anything you want to leave the people with?
I think that last one was the most powerful.
I
At
agree.
the end of the day, connect with your higher self, ask for guidance, and get to a place where to ask it to help you get to a place where you feel safer being thinner and where you're in your most ideal body and your most ideal life. And that is the most powerful way to live. There's no question about it.
Mic drop. Thank you. Jon Gabriel. I can't wait
Big
to
mic,
see you
by the
this
way.
summer. Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna have a whole setup
Love
here
that mic.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. Yeah,
Amazing. All right. Well, we'll be doing this again in a
yeah.
in a couple months now.
Couple of months. Yeah, two
Yeah.
months. Yeah, yeah,
So
mega. Yeah,
I can't wait to see you.
great. Yeah, be fun.
All right. Until
All right.
next time.
Thanks very much. That was awesome. And I love the work that you're doing. So keep doing it because you're
Thank you.
changing lives
Thank
in a
you.
big way.
Thank you. Thank you.